The United States does not have a coherent trade policy. It has a political strategy masquerading as trade policy that has taken dead aim on China. This is the cold hard truth about America's trade war against China. And economist Stephen Roach is correct. US politicians have forgotten common sense and basic economics and instead have decided to launch a trade war against China for political reasons. This started in 2018 when Donald Trump launched a series of tariffs against China in hopes of decreasing America's ballooning trade deficit. But in reality, all this did was shift America's trade deficit to other countries. Simply look at this chart and one can clearly see the US trade deficit has only accelerated after Trump's trade war against China. And this Bloomberg article from last month reports the US trade deficit is now $68.9 billion as merchandise trade deficit with Mexico climbed to a record. By targeting China, the US has simply diverted trade away from a low-cost producer to higher-cost countries, the equivalent of an additional tax hike on American consumers. Rising protectionism in the US towards anything Chinese has simply caused higher prices, which is exactly why we have seen inflation soar over the past few years in the US economy. But here is where the situation gets worse. Last week, Biden announced his plan to increase the Trump-led tariffs against China and will now target other industries, including steel, aluminum, semiconductors, EVs, and solar panels. These are all sectors where the United States has almost zero competitive advantage. Surprisingly, even Elon Musk, whose company Tesla would benefit the most from US tariffs against Chinese EVs, spoke out against Biden's decision. Neither Tesla nor I asked for these tariffs. In fact, I was surprised when they were announced. Things that inhibit freedom of exchange or distort the market are not good. This is quite the statement from Musk, who understands how important a good relationship with China is for a healthy US economy. And this leads us to a much larger problem. Biden's increased trade war with China will compromise America's green energy objectives at a time when the effects of climate change have never been more apparent. All these moves from the US government now risk turning the world into a worse place. If America truly wants to reduce its carbon footprint and participate in any of these emerging green industries, its only option is to collaborate with China. Don't believe me? Just listen to this clip from Erik Solheim, a Norwegian politician who is one of the world's most respected voices on China's green transition.
They basically won in 10 years' time the war on pollution, but that had a huge number of other spin-off effects. It put China in the front line as the number one environment protection nation of the world, which is an enormous achievement. And they have turned themselves into the absolute powerhouse of green production, electric cars, electric trains, metros. China is the lead in every single of these sector. Basically, China is at the very minimum 60% of every green sector in the world.
You will be hard-pressed to find a better insider into China's green revolution than Erik Solheim. Erik is the former Minister of Climate and the Environment of Norway and has been traveling to China for over 40 years. He has personally seen China's rise from one of the poorest nations in the world to its current position as a superpower. I recently interviewed Erik about China's green development, and I'm excited to bring you this exclusive interview in today's video. In this interview, Erik and I discuss the myth of China's overcapacity and explain how Chinese manufacturing is a benefit to the world.
And the argument about Chinese overcapacity is completely besides any rational economic theory.
Erik and I examine the policies of China's government that have allowed the country to rise so fast compared to the West.
Why is this happening in China? Because they have a much stronger government. The United States government is very strong in military terms, but very weak when it comes to the ability to get things done.
And finally, Erik and I discuss the best strategy for US and European companies to rise and compete fairly with China.
It's fair for the US and Europe to find ways to make sure that we can compete, but no one should blame the Chinese for being the leaders.
Today's interview is the best insight you can find on the reality of the US-China trade war. Let's begin. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Happy to be on your show.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I think it's so important, Erik, that more Westerners really get to understand, what is happening in China. China is making incredible moves, with the EV industry, with being the leader now in renewable energy. And I think this message is not really heard in Western media, and if it's not really heard in a positive way. But China's doing a lot of positive things. So I wanted to bring you in and really get your insights into China. What was your first time that you visited China?
I went to China first time in 1984.
Okay.
At that time, China was poorer than most nations in Africa. There was no private cars in China, no skyscrapers, just one metro line in the entire nation of China. And
Wow.
every Chinese was wearing the most boring of clothes and basically eating rice in the south and noodles in the north. It was a very, very, very poor place. It's completely different from today, of course. So I followed the enormous development of China, bringing the entire population out to extreme poverty, which was a major achievement. And then in the last decades, also turning China around to be the one indispensable nation for the green transformation of the world. It's absolutely sad to see that Western media is distorting this completely. I mean, it's impossible to get a right impression of China just by following Western media. So I can only encourage upon everyone, please go and see for yourself. That's the best way of getting some more information.
And I like what you said there, that it's indispensable, that, the number one nation right now, for this green revolution that we're seeing, and really something that's needed in the world, because obviously it's unsustainable the way that we're going with burning fossil fuels. I think climate change is a very real problem. It's something that also, if the United States and China cannot come together on this, you have to have the two biggest countries, working together in this space in order to get a positive change. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely, I believe it's an absolute no-brainer. And by the way, it's not just the environment. I mean, all the major problems of our time, restarting the economies after COVID, bringing everyone out of poverty, solving the wars in Ukraine or in Gaza or Sudan or other horrible wars, and of course, climate and environment. Every single issue
Right.
is easy if we work together and more difficult if we don't work together.
Absolutely. Now, Erik, as a green politician, I know that you've seen this rise from China and certainly becoming the world leader in renewable energy. I think you certainly would agree that the West should learn from China in this regard. What are some of the key industries in China that that they're really leading in renewable energy that really the West should be learning from?
Absolutely, but if you allow me, let me go one step back and try to understand why this shift has happened in China.
Yeah.
I believe it from the beginning it was all about pollution. Look, 10 years ago, Beijing was horribly polluted. I mean, you could deal the air by a knife because it was so horribly thick of pollution. The sky was gray every day. 3 weeks ago, I was jogging, running in Beijing. Sky was blue, sun was bright. Can inhale clear, fresh air. Such a transformation.
Right.
That happened because people of China was so tired of this pollution. They demanded change from the leaders. When I spoke to a middle-class person, they always said, yes, I'm happy with economic developments, but I want to see the sun. Or I don't want my children to live in such a pollution. Then, forced by or put pressure by the people, the leaders acted, and they turned around China. They basically won in 10 years' time the war on pollution. But that had a huge number of the spin-off effects. It put China in the front line as the number one environment protection nation of the world, which is an enormous achievement.
Right.
And they turned themselves into the absolute powerhouse of green production, electric cars, electric trains, metros. China is the lead in every single sector. Basically, China is at the very minimum 60% of every green sector in the world.
Yeah, it is quite incredible to see the numbers. I saw a tweet that you had sent out that basically it said, China's providing a model for the world to follow for this more sustainable Earth. About 60% of the world's electric cars, 70% of the green rail, 60% of metros, and 95% of electric buses run in China alone. And I first went to China in 2007. I was in Beijing. Some days the pollution was so thick you could not even see the color of the traffic lights. You couldn't see if it was red or green because it was so visibly thick, the pollution. And it is incredible to see that transformation and a real tangible difference for the people of China and people that are visiting there. Very different, from 15, 16 years ago when I was, first traveling to China.
It's an absolute transformation. Of course, a lot of the same has happened in the West. I mean, Western cities today are much less polluted than they were. Western rivers, I mean, the Danube or the Rhine or the Seine in Europe are much less polluted. I mean, these Olympics, the French will organize some of the swimming competition in the Seine. Of course, it would have been completely unthinkable just a few decades ago.
Right.
However, the big difference is that China has done in 10 years what we maybe did in 4 decades. So the speed of this transformation is much higher, and the dedication in China is to be admired by the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know that China's speed is really hard for anybody to keep up with. I mean, when China's government sets out to do something, they usually do it. They put all the resources behind it. And when it becomes a national priority, it is exactly that. It gets done very effective, very efficient. I want to switch gears here, though, Eric, to the EV industry, because
Mm-hmm.
this is a very hot topic right now. We're seeing a lot of, moves against China's industry. For example, this past week, we saw Joe Biden, my president here in the United States, came out and said that we are going to increase the tariffs on Chinese EVs from 25% to 100%, and basically signaling that they do not want to have Chinese electric vehicles coming into this country, into the United States, that is, at all. But I think what's interesting, there's a lot of misconceptions because EVs have really changed the entire auto industry in China. I think it's up, over 50% of the cars now in China are EVs, but it's not just one or two companies. I mean, there's, many, many companies, there's incredible innovation. And very much, I think China is leading the EV industry. Can you tell us a little bit more insights about this?
Absolutely. I think this was a wonderful environment strategy from China, but also a very smart business strategy. Look, 10 years ago, China, yes, they had a few factories in the automobile industry, but not a single brand which was well known. Toyota is probably the most well-known brand in the world, or at least among them. You go into the deserts of Nevada where you are sitting, everyone would know Toyota. You go up in the mountains in Norway or into the jungles of Africa, every person, maybe 8 billion people on the planet knows Toyota. It was nothing like that in China. So
Right.
what did the Chinese do? Leapfrog into the electric car industry, where they could make brands, and now BYD has passed Tesla as the biggest electric car brand in the world. But as you said, it's about 10 different brands, NIO, Geely, Hongji, and also the tech giants of China, the Huawei and Xiaomi, they're also going into electric cars. And the world should be thankful. This is what we all have asked for. This was also what the Biden administration called for until very recently. They said we need a very, very rapid transformation of the world into green. That can, of course, only happen if the big business is going green. And China showed the way. We should all be grateful. Of course, it's understandable that America or Europe or India, whoever, also want jobs.
Right.
But the best way to that, let's invite Chinese companies to invest in Europe and in America. Bring their technology, bring more competition into the American electric vehicle market. China brought Tesla to China to a large extent to create competition in the Chinese market, to make sure that their companies were ready for competition, because they're facing a very, very serious challenger. America should do exactly the same. Invite BYD and NIO and Geely and the others to invest in America, speed up transformation, and then American companies should be allowed to compete. If you close down the American market, yes, maybe you can get an American market for electric cars that will be substantially more costly for American consumers. And in all likelihood, America will not be globally competitive, because a closed down American market will not make competitive cars for the global market. Simply, America will not be able to sell the cars in Mexico, or Brazil, or Indonesia, or India, or Europe, because they are developed through a closed-door economy. Right. All experience in the last 100 years in the world, I mean, when China was closed down, when India was closed down, they didn't develop. They developed when they opened up the markets. And that's exactly what America should do now, open up the markets for this competition, and of course, find ways to support their own industry so that it can develop in this difficult and this hard competition.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Erik, I want to talk about one thing you said there, because you said that China was very smart because they opened their door to Tesla and allowed Tesla to come in. And because of Tesla coming into China, that really helped breed the innovation inside of China, And one of the interesting things is, like you said, that in the beginning, Toyota was so well known around the world. China really saw this as an opportunity, because they said, we cannot compete with the traditional gas powered car. That's already developed, right? The Germans, the Japanese, the Europeans, there's so many great, gas automakers, But maybe we can go ahead and go one step further. Let's go to the EVs. Maybe we can be the dominant force in EVs. So they really had a very incredible vision, the Chinese government, saying, let's go ahead and move on to the next thing and try to be the leader in that. And what they did is the government started giving out subsidies. And what they, interesting fact, I don't think many people know, is that these subsidies were also available to international companies. For example, Tesla. Tesla came to China, because of incentives and because of these subsidies. As a result, now the Tesla factory, the Shanghai Gigafactory, it is the largest factory in Tesla. 50% of the world's Teslas are coming from that factory in Shanghai. So you have Tesla very much involved, and they are very much part of that Chinese EV ecosystem. And now you have seen so many of these Chinese companies, learn from Tesla, develop it, and now even have technology that's much better and much more advanced than Tesla. I mean, I've seen some of these new BYD vehicles. I mean, I've seen nothing like this technology in Europe or America. I mean, these cars are truly amazing.
The Chinese cars are better and, of course, much lower price, so they would take basically the entire market. So, I mean, it's fair for the US and Europe to find ways to make sure that we can compete. But no one should blame the Chinese for being the leaders. We are not blaming Apple for being the lead company in the mobile phone industry. And look, I mean, Biden and others are not talking about Yellen went to China and basically told the Chinese, we are making far too many, far too good, and far too cheap green products. That was what we all wanted. No one should blame China for that. The West should pick up the competition to do this better. And the argument about Chinese overcapacity is completely besides any rational economic theory. My nation, Norway, has overcapacity in salmon. We are not eating all the salmon we produce in Norway. That's why we can sell salmon to, say, the United States, to import mobile phones from the United States to Norway. Apple is the most successful and valuable company maybe in the entire world. Why? Right. They have an enormous overcapacity of mobile phones. They're not making mobile phones just for America, but for the entire rest of the world. They have overcapacity. And then US can sell these phones. So if China now have so-called overcapacity, means they make better product at a cheaper rate. That's what we all should admire. And then, of course, compete. Overcapacity is the foundation of trade and has been... Frankly, I mean, the reason why the United States of America in the last 100 years has been the dominant power is that its industries always had overcapacity. America could produce more than it consumed. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a dominant power.
Yeah, no, that's a really brilliant insight. The last month, all we've heard from U.S. politicians is overcapacity. We need to stop China. They're producing too much. But you're very correct, because that's exactly what we need. And that's exactly what China has been doing. I like how you put that into perspective, that is why America has been so successful for the last 100 years, is because of overcapacity, that we're producing more than we can consume, hence why we can start exporting around the world. I also really love salmon, so I appreciate you and the Norwegians for making so much salmon. I had some sushi last night for dinner, so I had enjoyed probably some Norwegian salmon. It is amazing how these politicians in the West fail to understand some of these most basic economic principles. Like you very easily answered this question of overcapacity by just doing some simple math and understanding how global trade works.
Look, I mean, one of the most successful companies in the world is Samsung. With a whole market of 50 million people, they are making mobile phones into the entire world, and is the principal competitor to Apple. Right. If they could only make for the Korean market, I mean, what would Samsung have been? Right. A small outfit in Seoul, which no one really took notice of. So overcapacity is the foundation of trade. But of course, I mean, it's fully understandable that Biden wants jobs in Wisconsin and Michigan. I mean, he wants to win the elections there, and he wants to, of course, support his own people. That's completely rational and normal for a politician. Right. But he should stop blaming China for being successful, and he should look into how can the United States, in a rational way, support its own industries so that it can be competitive with Chinese industries.
Eric, I think that brings up an interesting question, though, because is there a way that these Western nations could really compete with China, though, or are they too far advanced? Because I think there's a few elements here. Number one, China controls a lot of the critical elements that are needed for the EVs. When you look at, for example, the EV battery, most of those minerals and metals, China contains anywhere from 60 to 80% of that manufacturing capacity. So, for example, I don't think it is possible for any nation in the world to develop an EV battery without the help of China. They have this really strategic advantage. Is there any way that the US and Western countries could actually compete with China, or should we just embrace China as being the number one and look to utilize their products?
I mean, I think overall China has some advantages in industrial production, which we don't, maybe not in all in the West realize. It has a huge industrial, highly educated working class, which is not yet developed in India or Africa or other developed nations. And in the US and Europe, we have moved into a post-industrial society where very few young people really want to be a highly trained mechanic or electrician or plumber. But you need this kind of work, and they still have status in China, which
Right.
they tend not to have, say, in the United States. China also, of course, has a market of 1.4 billion people. Well, that's as much as North America, South America, and Europe combined. So if you succeed in the home market of China, you will tend also to be globally competitive. And added, of course, China has a much stronger government. Look, in 2008, China had zero, absolutely zero, high-speed rail. United States also had zero high-speed rail. At the time, we all thought that there would be high-speed rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles to San Diego. It was all on the cards. A lot of preparations have been done. We thought it was just to roll it out. Well, since 2008, China has rolled out 45,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. That's circumventing the globe once at the equator. The United States of America has not, sorry to say, developed any serious high-speed rail, not in California, nowhere else. There is something in Florida which has some qualities of high-speed rail, even if it's not even close to the Chinese speed. So why is this happening in China? Go to have a much stronger government. The United States government is very strong in military terms, but very weak when it comes to the ability to get things done. So yes, China has a number of advantages, but the only way for the West to react is, of course, to look into how can we compete? Where are the areas where we can compete? Maybe inviting Chinese companies to invest in America and Europe is the best way also to unravel how they work so speedily and fast and with high quality. And of course, it also bringing competitors into our market, which will shore up competition and force Volkswagen or General Motors or Ford to really compete.
Right. No, that's great insights, Eric. I want to take it one step further and talk about some other industries as well, because, going back to these tariffs that Joe Biden had introduced, we've now seen an increase. You've got 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. We have 50% on semiconductors, another 50% on solar panels, which is, again, a very big industry here in the United States. And then obviously, like we said, 100% on Chinese EVs. Tell me more about your opinion on these tariffs on the other industries, besides just the EVs. Will this really work to suppress China's growth in these industries?
I very much doubt it. I don't think the United States will be competitive towards China in these industries. I tend to believe also that the United States will be better served by focusing on its own strength rather than its weaknesses. I mean, look, whenever China makes a railroad in Africa, and it has happened frequently, there are some American diplomat or minister running around saying, oh, this is very dangerous for Africa. But of course, you can never, ever get any African leader to stop getting a railroad from China, if not. And the United States is highly unlikely to compete since it has not developed railroads at home. It's very hard to do it abroad. Why don't the US then focus on its own strengths? During COVID, it seems to be the case that American companies made the best vaccines. Why don't the United States offer Africa to take less of the risk of vaccines in Africa, take that in the home market, which can pay in the West, and allow cheap vaccines for Africa? Or it's also the case that American universities still has the highest prestige anywhere in the world. There are more people who want to go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton than to Tsinghua or Peking. Well, invite lots of students to these universities, build on your strengths, not build on your weaknesses. And the ability of the United States to produce industrial products as efficient, low cost and high quality as China is at least very hard to see. Maybe it will happen, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I agree with you here. And kind of the big takeaway that I've got from today's conversation is we should embrace China's rise in EVs and also the green production, because what they've done in China in a very short period of time is really providing a model for the world, because we've seen the tangible result, right? We've seen the pollution reduction. We've seen now, 50% of cars on the road being EVs, a much greener, a more sustainable, that's certainly a strength, right? Manufacturing is the strength of China. That's exactly why Apple goes to China to make the iPhone, because they said it's not just about, being able to produce it cheaper, but it's also the high quality engineers that we're able to find there that can really, do the high quality manufacturing. That's something that has changed so significantly in China, right? 40 years ago, we think of China as only making cheap products. Now China can, certainly make cheap products, but they can also make the most advanced and highly meticulous products as well. And like you said, US has other strengths. I would agree. Our university system, very famous in the world. And, there's a lot of other areas of expertise that we can focus on. Erik, as we come to the conclusion of today's interview, I want to ask one question that I ask every guest that comes on the show. It's a great question because our goal with this channel is to help people understand China more and see it from a different lens. So what is one thing that you want the world to know about China?
I think for most people today, people are not aware that it's the most modern place on earth. I mean, if you go to the great cities, particularly in southern China, like Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Hangzhou, they are the most modern cities in the world. There's nothing like that. I mean, they have the best infrastructure, the cleanest streets, the highest number of skyscrapers, highest number of robots. I mean, they are really you are really seeing the future if you go there. If I may add, of course, I am also very interested in history. So what's fascinating with China is this modernity coupled with the roots of the nation, because for nearly all of human history, China was the most advanced place.
Right.
The time of the Roman Empire, Han China and Roman Empire was basically the same size, basically the same population, and basically the same level of human development. For the rest of history before the modern times, China was far ahead. I mean, Chinese cities were 15 times bigger than any city in what's today North America, not to speak, or Europe. So China was so much more advanced. My advice to people is simply just wrap up your curiosity. Be a little bit more curious. Don't cause trust Western media, which gives a completely wrong impression of China. Go there, see, listen to music, watch movies, take an interest in the rapid development of technology in China, and of course take an interest in these thousands of years of history, which is so incredibly fascinating. Any student of history cannot find a more wonderful place than China.
Yeah, that's excellent. Erik, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show and to get your insights. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for being a green politician and prioritizing the future of our planet, and certainly being a great advocate of a better relationship with China. I think that is something that we can all, learn to work towards. And I think today's interview, I hope that more people can understand a little bit more about how much China has changed the world and how it's continuing to be this leader. And the big takeaway is that we need to embrace that, not fear that, but embrace it really for a better future in our world, in North America and Europe as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, Erik. Take care. Everyone, thank you for spending time with me on YouTube, and I hope you enjoyed Erik's insights into China. I want to give a special thanks to a fellow Norwegian friend named Tommy, who introduced Erik and I to each other and helped set up today's interview. Longtime viewers of the channel will remember Tommy from an episode I recorded last summer in China. Tommy is the only Norwegian factory owner in China, and I personally flew all the way to Jiangyin, a small town on the outskirts of Wuxi, to visit Tommy and his business partner Andy, who co-own an amazing textile factory in China. This video has gone on to receive over 770,000 views and currently ranks #1 on Google search for China factory. If you are curious to see what a real China factory looks like, click here to watch this behind-the-scenes look into this amazing textile factory. I promise you, you're going to absolutely enjoy this video. And as always, thank you for your support, and we'll see you in our next video soon.